No, but they shot at specifically the radiators of the transformers.
Yeah, cars.
Right? It's the things that, the radiators, the big fans that cool down the transformer, right? Electrical power plants and substations, they use oil to generate electric power, right? And so the transformers hold most of the oil. Sometimes that is like up to hundreds of gallons.
Okay.
A lot of it. And so that oil can leak out, which can cause really bad environmental damage, but also can cause overheating.
Gotcha.
And that leads to like permanent damage, right? And so it's very expensive and time consuming to kind of fix this stuff, which is why all of this equipment is so heavily protected. They don't want people just shooting at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to replace. So it seems like the goal was specifically to disable the transformers to cause permanent damage to the power supply, right? But here's the thing. It didn't actually damage the whole power supply, right?
Yeah.
And that's because, the transformers, they're equipped with sensors. They'll like immediately shut down if they feel like they're getting shot at, right?
Me too. Yeah, like a dog with fireworks.
Like they'll disconnect the sensors when they feel like they're getting shot at. They feel damage coming. They'll disconnect immediately the transformers from the larger grid.
Yeah.
To kind of protect, siphon it off, protect the larger grid from shutting down damage to the grid, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what happened in Moore County. And so because the transformer got disconnected, like you said, the lights go off for 45,000 people, but the substation wasn't fully damaged, and it didn't cause what we would call a cascading effect, where then that this damage leads to damage in the rest of the power grid in other areas, in other counties, right?
Yeah.
Which was perhaps the goal, which we'll talk about.
Well, to be clear, the power was out in Moore County for about half their customers there, or half the population there, for 5 days.
Yeah.
Which is a long time, including all those people who have medical devices at home, people who, it's winter. Obviously, it's North Carolina, so it's not exactly as cold as some other places. But
it's still
it's
December to
cold.
remember.
Yeah. People who are Civil War reenactors were kind of the only people who were unscathed from this sort of thing because they could live like they did in the ancient days. But the way that this kind of stuff works in the first place, right, is because I actually don't really know how power works. It's one of those things that I take for granted. I guess the way that it works, right, is that there's power plants, nuclear plants, actually not very many of those, but, turbines and then fucking, the water ones and all that kind of shit, power plants. They generate the power. They send this shit out over transmission lines, right? And it goes to this big-ass substation. Mm-hmm. From there, it gets distributed on more power lines to smaller substations. Those are the more frequent, common ones. And then from there, they get distributed to individual people's homes. Electricity is like stepped up in voltage, stepped down in voltage. And so there's all these different nodes on this network. And like we said before, the network's a pretty massive, sprawling, and kind of fragile thing. Mm-hmm. And so if you actually damage one of these nodes, particular ones, then this can actually, can cause a cascading effect where more and more people will lose power, right?
Yeah.
I think it was in 2014, the Wall Street Journal got this leaked memo, which I love it when the Wall Street Journal gets a leaked memo. Because it's also very obvious who leaked the memo to them in this, which is like clearly the former director of the FERC. But in 2014, they get this leaked memo from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that said, and this is true of at least a decade ago. Remember, this is 2014. This is 10 years ago about. All it would take would be a concerted assault on 9 specific substations in order to plunge most of the country into a complete blackout for weeks or months.
That's crazy.
That is fucking nuts, right?
Someone should do something about that.
I know. But the thing is, and they were like, oh, we're going to look into it. And I looked to see for a while what they did to look into it. All of these different companies had pledged some amount of money to harden these, which basically means like to beef up the defenses of these substations. But I think there's 55,000 substations in America, right? Mm. And obviously they can't have an armed guard at every single one of them. But a lot of them don't even have cameras, or if they do have cameras, they're very old cameras. In particular, Moore County. I mean,
Or they have those fake ones that you buy just to like make people think that there's real cameras.
I don't get how much is a video camera. Like the fake camera seems like it would cost as much. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem like that. Anyways,
I think the heyday of the fake camera was when video cameras cost a lot.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I guess that makes sense because now, yeah, I think they're pretty cheap. Anyways, this was like a serious concern back in 2014 because of something that we'll talk about in just a moment. But it doesn't look like a ton was actually done to harden. I'm sure that these specific substations that were identified by the federal government, I'm sure they maybe have a security guard or something now. But clearly, like your local neighborhood substation does not have one.
Well, it's interesting because the thing with Moore County is that after the investigation, they wouldn't call it an act of terrorism.
Yeah.
They wouldn't go that far. And they really couldn't find very much about what happened. But local officials said, this is so ominous. They said, this person knew exactly what they were doing. I mean, to be fair, I think it doesn't take a genius to know to attack a transformer. Like I said, oh my God, I know what a transformer, you know what I mean?
And then like at the substation, there's not a lot there besides like the buses, which is like the long, like kind of rigid fucking lines.
Totally.
In the transformers. And the transformers are the thing that's probably easiest to shoot.
Well, that's true. And at the same time, did you know that like all U.S. power infrastructure is basically out in the open?
Yeah.
Right? So like it's really easy to kind of map it out just from Google, or like there is actually publicly – there's a huge map online that's called like openinfrastructuremap.org or something like that. Maybe it's a .com. I don't remember. But it has a whole map of all the kind of open infrastructure in the world. And so it's all there in one place for everyone to see. But I will say from 2013 to August of 2022, there have been over 700 physical attacks on the U.S. electrical grid, which is pretty crazy.